Welcome back to another episode. I'm your host, Ryan Richards, residential loan officer and real estate investor here in New England. Today, I'm bringing another solo episode diving into 4 strategies that I've seen in the market today to reduce your cost of living when purchasing a property. So we're going to talk through, of course, multifamily house hacking. We'll talk through rent by the room strategies, storage space rentals, and one that you'll have to stick around to find out. So hope you enjoy the show. As always, thanks for watching. So to dive into things, it's only right that I start with the most widely known way to reduce your housing expenses while creating long-term wealth. And that, of course, is multifamily house hacking. So, of course, if you listen to my podcast, you should know what house hacking is. But house hacking is the idea of buying a multifamily property, moving into one of the units and renting out the others to collect some passive income and reduce the amount that you have to pay out every month for your mortgage. So of course, multifamily house hacking has its pros and cons. Pros being that you typically can produce more cash flow than some of the other options that we'll talk about. And it's more stable. So you're renting to longer term tenants. If you rent out a multifamily asset, one of the units, let's say is a 3-bedroom apartment, that's typically a long-term tenant. Someone looking to stay for 2, 3, 4, 5 years or more is typically more stable than some of the other strategies like renting by the room, which is typically more short-term. Storage space can tend to be more short-term. So it's more stable from that standpoint, which makes it more risky from the income side of things. You want to really make sure the tenant you put in place is going to pay you on time. So the upfront vetting that needs to be done, there's more diligence required than if you were, say, renting by the room to a friend, which we'll talk about in a moment. But some of the drawbacks to multifamily is that there are more utilities in a property and there are more people living there. So there tends to be more maintenance. And where we are geographically, the Northeast, up in New England, especially Massachusetts, Worcester to Providence to Boston, a lot of the properties that are built in this area are old. You're talking properties built over 100 years ago. Now, different states like Florida, that'd be very uncommon to find an 1880 building. You're not going to. It's just not when properties are built down there. Up here, it's very common. So you have different types of building practices mixed with modern building. The differences in age creates a lot more maintenance challenges. So you might have older plumbing that needs to be replaced over time. You might have older mechanicals, older water heaters, furnaces, older electrical panels improved upon over time. So not every piece of construction is going to be up to current code because they were evolved on over 10 or 15 years. So if you go into the basement, for example, to upgrade your electric system, let's say you have older panels in the basement, you want to upgrade your electric panel. You might have to do other things as a result of you wanting to just do your one panel because some of the other parts of the electrical system are out of code. One I ran into as an example was I wanted to upgrade my electric panels. In New England, older electric panels were on fuse boxes. So individual fuses, they look like little light bulbs that just like a light bulb would actually pop. That's the original fuse breaker breaking. The breaker would pop when a short circuit or overload happened in order to prevent fires, overheating, things like that. So it's important to think about these types of things when you're looking at multifamily property, especially in New England. Now, another option you can look at to bring in some rental income while you're living in a property that might not be a multifamily is renting by the room. It's very common in a lot of cities. You'll see it especially in Boston and very common in Providence and, of course, with college students. So let's say you, for example, wanted to live in the city. You want to live in the city of Boston. Well, a lot of people, especially out of college, will move into an apartment and they'll split the rent with 3 or 4 of their friends. They all get a room. They all pay a portion of the rent, but they're paying to a landlord. You, as a savvy young individual, could buy your own condo, say a 3-4 bedroom condo, and still do the same strategy. You can buy a condo, you can rent out each one of the rooms to your friends, and just own a different type of asset. You still own a condo. You're not owning a multifamily with multiple units, multiple sets of mechanicals, bathrooms. You have one set and it's controlled by the HOA. So a lot of the bigger maintenance items, CapEx type items, roofs, things of that nature fall under someone else's management. So it can be a little bit easier to manage from the property side, but you have to deal with people in your direct living quarters, which of course can create its own strains and challenges. But one thing people really don't think about is actually being the person to buy that condo. Rather than rent it from someone else, you can be the person that collects the rent from your friends. So something to consider. And then when you move out later, you can actually rent those individual bedrooms to college students. So if you find it in the right area, could be commuters. There's a lot of things you can do with rent by the room. So something to consider there if you didn't really want to dive into an old multifamily building or be a landlord in the true sense of renting out apartments, you could rent by the room to your friends. Now, one thing, of course, you want to really make sure you have figured out beforehand when renting to college students is your lease. You want your lease to be bulletproof in terms of what it addresses. It should almost be a handbook for how to operate the property, just because there are a lot of things that come along with renting to a room full of college students, especially if you're not actively managing the property on site. And making sure you set the ground rules early. It's much different than if you owned a multifamily building, you're renting a 3-bedroom apartment to a mother, father, and their one child. It's a different type of atmosphere. So you want to make sure you set the ground rules early and have those conversations of how things are going to operate at your building and have that lease to be able to back those up if something were to go wrong. Very similarly, that typically requires, larger security deposits. So you really want to make sure you do the proper paperwork when it comes to security deposits so that in the event something was broken, you can get reimbursed. So this requires a little bit more legwork on the legal side of things to make sure you're protected if something goes wrong. And of course, if you're renting to friends and family, that always can create some awkward situations. So I would definitely put more thought into the type of arrangement you want to have and whether or not it makes sense to rent to family and friends, because that, of course, can cause some other challenges. One other type of strategy you can look at is, let's say you do buy a single family house. Well, what other value add opportunities are on the property? And this, of course, depends on what type of cash you have available. But one common option you can look at is adding an ADU or an accessory dwelling unit. So let's say you buy a single family house and it has a large barn out back. Could you convert that barn into a 2-bedroom apartment where you can then rent it out to an outside tenant and reduce your overall living costs on the property? Or on that same property, does your property have some extra storage space? Let's say you have a barn, but you don't want to convert it to an ADU. Can you put up a temporary wall and rent out individual storage units? I have properties where I get several $100s a month just for garage space or for storage space. So some things to think about in different ways to utilize your property so that you can collect some extra income and not have to pay the full mortgage yourself. But when it comes to renting storage, I would say what's important is to set the ground rules on access to your property and make sure you get some cameras set up so that if there's ever disputes on what happened to people's things when they're on your property, you have footage to go back to. But definitely setting the terms of use is definitely important. I know in my personal experience, I've had people who have rented garages from me who were starting to operate them more as a commercial business, taking cars in and out, not using them for storage, which of course, at that time I had the lease in place to say, hey, we agreed upon originally, this is not to be used for anything but pure storage, which means you're not coming and going daily as if it were, a commercial garage. You're not operating your business from my garage. So make sure you have the lease in place to back that up. And of course, the camera footage to be able to show them, you're violating the lease. Here's what it looks like on camera. Lease says you can't do that. You need to stop or we're going to terminate the agreement. So having those ground rules in place is really important, especially if you're going to be living on the property at the same time. But some things to consider. ADUs, great option, but more expensive, can require local permitting. Storage units, fairly easy to do and a lot less upfront work, a lot less upfront cost. You can do them fairly minimally. You can even rent the garage by the floor. If you have that barn out back, you could rent the top floor to someone, bottom floor to someone else, and structure it, fairly simply like that. So just some other ideas to get your wheels turning. And for number 4, this is one that really only applies in certain geographic areas, but can be very lucrative, and it's renting parking spaces. So if you buy a property in the city, it of course is nice to say that you have a yard out front or a yard out back, but you can get rid of that grass and turn it into money. So I've seen plenty of clients do this. Parking spaces in the city go for hundreds of dollars a month, sometimes thousands of dollars a month. You can actually go on MLS or go on the internet and look up parking spaces for sale in the city. There are $1 million parking spots. So this is a really lucrative business opportunity. I have some clients who make 6 figures off of parking spaces. Let me just say that again, 6 figures off of asphalt. So definitely something to look into. Of course, there's local city bylaws to watch out for. You can't just pave any part of your property. You have to make sure you do it the right way. But with a few phone calls and some more details, you can figure out whether or not this is an opportunity for you to pursue. Parking spaces are huge. Not only can you rent parking spaces on a month-to-month or year-to-year basis, there are actually applications you can get, such as Spot Hero, where you can essentially short-term rent a parking spot. So let's say you have 2 parking spots and you know your significant other or your other partner in your unit is not going to be there for the weekend. You can put that up for rent. And if you're in a desirable enough area, you can get hundreds, sometimes even thousands of dollars extra over just a few days for renting out your parking space. So it's definitely something to consider. Again, very market specific. If you had a property in a very rural area, probably not going to be something you're going to look to add parking space to rent out. But if you're in the city or surrounding areas, or you're nearby local sporting venues, Gillette Stadium, if you're nearby the Red Sox Stadium, if you're anywhere in proximity to college sporting stadiums, consider renting out some extra space for parking. We need parking. Obviously, if you've been in any city, the number one thing you're going to find on a weekend is you'd have nowhere to park. And everyone's been in that situation. So definitely consider that opportunity. You can also rent out the parking spaces to potentially other landlords. Let's say they have a 3-bedroom apartment, but they don't have any parking spaces left at their building. You could network with local landlords, see if they will rent out that parking space from you for their tenants to use. Of course, different caveats there. Want to make sure that the terms are set as far as what spot and how it gets to be used. But something you might not have thought about that can generate you some more money. So as always, I hope you found this information valuable today. I appreciate you giving the episode a listen. And if you have found anything from this episode to be valuable, please take a moment, leave a like, a rating, and a review, because it's how this show gets out to more people just like you.